Reflections, Mentor and Protégé, featuring the work of William B. Adair and his mentors, in exhibition through December 16th at the Cultural Arts Center Gallery on Montgomery College's Tacoma Park, Silver Spring campus. Bill Adair has been luckier than most. A plethora of people has helped contour his master framer, painter, sculptor, art dealer career. Early on, Adair's talent and enthusiasm were recognized and appreciated by a cadre of academics, such as Picasso pal and Pulitzer Prize winner Henry Nisa. Nisa's early instruction with gold leaf propelled the younger artist to work with the material at the Smithsonian and eventually start Gold Leaf Studios in 1982. A further texturing of alliances came from Ellen Gelman, who also encouraged Adair's work, but from a professorial distance. As the first painting instructor to the artist in the making, her view, Adair remembered, was to worry about making good art and not making it as an artist. The rest would follow. Montgomery College's Joan Rosenstein approved of Adair's craftsmanship, but in a curt, kind sort of way. The draftsman, Mitchell Jameson, had a different perspective. Jameson imbued students with the ability to draw with precise rapidity, while Blaine Larson, Adair's debut drawing teacher, exposed them to his in-class copying demonstrations. The tactile Kenneth Campbell was a sculptor specializing in marble who told Adair, "The sculptor needs to feel, not think. The hand needs to know what the mind is wanting, thinking." Adair's training was rounded out vividly by Montgomery College professor and art historian Alan Marsh. According to Adair, Marsh made the subjects come alive, something no one else was able to do. This multifaceted advice from variegated mentors has continued to arouse learning, feeling, thinking, and living as a respected, important, and prolific artist-artisan.
Well, when I was in high school, one of the most fascinating things to me was my art class. First of all, it was the only A I ever got. And secondly, it was something that I really enjoyed doing. And I figured out that early on at that point, if I got an A in it and I enjoyed doing it, well then damn it, that's what I'm going to do. Because nothing else was as interesting to me as the creation of artwork.
Hi, my name is Chris Murray, and I'm the director of Govinda Gallery in Washington, D.C. I'm delighted to be here today in a conversation with the artist Bill Adair, whose work is featured at the K. Fritz Art Center at Montgomery College in an exhibition called Reflections, Mentor and Protégé. Bill, how are you?
Great, thanks, Chris.
Good to see you.
Thanks.
It's very exciting, this exhibit, and I noticed the name is apt, Mentor and Protégé. I know the exhibit includes your work as well as selections of other teachers who have influenced you as an artist over the years. I know you're a painter, you're a gilder. I also know you as a poet and also as a historian. Quite a wonderful variety of interests. What first drew you when you were a younger person to the creative life?
Well, I got my first A in art in high school, and that was an indication to me that one of my teachers, thought that I was exceptional in this, and I loved it. So when I went to Montgomery College, I began my art career there.
At Montgomery College, were you introduced to materials there, techniques? What kind of studies did you do at Montgomery College that were art related?
Well, I started off with advertising arts, and I had some really good teachers who tried to steer me in the right direction. Alan Marsh was an art history teacher who turns out was also an artist and talked about materials and techniques in ancient Renaissance world that I knew nothing about. Joan Rosenstein, my design teacher, tried to get me on course in terms of thinking of art as a career. And then Blaine Larson, my drawing teacher, taught me that the most important thing an artist can do is to draw, to constantly draw. Wow. So I adopted that as my daily routine.
So it was a significant foundation for you, personally speaking, to be there, to be inspired like that at Montgomery College?
Well, it was terrific because I really hadn't planned on going to college. This was 1967, and I was going to hitchhike to California. And my dad convinced me that it would be a good thing before I went on the trip to at least spend a little bit of time with my friends and my colleagues and to pursue something that I loved, and that was art. And so with that encouragement, I enrolled at Montgomery College.
I'm Joan Rosenstein. I am a former teacher here at Montgomery College, Professor Emeritus from the Art Department. I was here for 30 years, and the very first year that I taught here happened to be the year that Bill Adair was in my class. So when I was hired by Dr. Alan Marsh, I had about a week and a half to prepare for my classes. So I guess in a way, Bill was really one of my guinea pigs. Basic design, two-dimensional and three-dimensional design, and Bill did take both of those classes from me. We're problem solving with visual elements. If you take a set size piece of paper, how do you best compose it? Design 1 and 2 were not easy electives. They were challenging. I was challenging them. I encouraged their classmates to challenge each other and to continue to push the boundaries and push the box as much as possible, to think outside the box. I know that's a hackneyed expression, but I think it's an appropriate one.
Ultimately, you received a degree in studio arts at the University of Maryland, right?
Yeah, I went to Montgomery College for 1 year, and then I went on to the University of Maryland, where they had a degree program in studio art, and that is when I really launched into this as a serious endeavor, as a life choice of what I wanted to do with my life. When I walked into one of my painting classes, the teacher had 8mm cameras. It was Henry Nisa, and he said, "You're going to learn to paint with cameras today." So it was a crossover of multimedia and all kinds of, the conceptual art, and the avant-garde was all very much part of our aesthetic at that point.
After you got your degree, after you were awarded your degree in studio arts, what happened then?
Well, I was going to go to graduate school, and my painting professor, Henry Nisa, he encouraged me, oddly enough, not to go to graduate school. He thought that my work was so developed that I should really just go and open up a studio, and he said, "Your education should be going to museums and looking." He said, "That's what an artist does. You constantly look at what's going on in museums." He said, "Go to galleries." And he said, "You need to feel the pulse of your time." And so I walked out of that class, and there was an ad on the bulletin board for part-time work at the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery. So I took this part-time job while I was waiting to be discovered as an artist. And of course, the way things go, 10 years later, a wife and a baby and mortgages and payments, I decided that I would pretty much start my own company in gilding and frame making and conservation while I pursued my art. And I never wanted to be an artist who had to make art. I wanted to make it on my own terms. And so I went back to my teachers constantly. I was never out of their reach. And I continually used them as sounding boards, as my friends, as my mentors. And so I continued the relationship with the art community, with my teachers, and I began to collect their work. So I became inexorably attached to my teachers and their ideas.
My name is Henry Nisa. In 1969, I came to the University of Maryland. I was hired by the University Art Department to teach painting and drawing. And in the spring of 1970, my first year, Billy was in one of my painting classes, an advanced painting class. Billy, as a student, he was a pretty gifted student, and I was interested in him as a human being. Billy was one of the guys that stood out in the class. Kids all think they're going to be famous artists, and they are not. So my idea was to give them an idea of alternative means of supporting themselves in the art field. I brought a whole bunch of material down to the studio at Maryland and taught the class how to gold leaf. Billy actually learned how to gold leaf in a painting class at the University of Maryland in the spring of 1970. I was also interested in showing them something about conservation, fine art conservation, and I took them, Billy and the class, down to the Smithsonian Institute laboratory for painting conservation, and suggesting that that was an alternative career in the fine arts. When he graduated, he applied for a job at the Smithsonian, and I wrote him a very good letter of recommendation, and he did get a job with the National Portrait Gallery. And he was working in the National Portrait Gallery doing, among other things, framing.
Let's get back to the Smithsonian. After school, you ended up with a job there for 10 years. And is that where you became a gilder? Did you learn the craft of gilding at the Smithsonian originally?
Well, I did, from Oliver Anderson, my teacher, who took me under his wing and showed me not only how to navigate the complicated labyrinth of bureaucracy, but also how to gild in the proper way. And once that was established, I was able to acquire a grant from the Smithsonian to travel to Europe and study gilding, and also went to New York to the House of Heidenreich, which is a great framing concern, and Henry took me under his wing and showed me about the history of frames. And so I began to worry about the value of my work, the value of a frame that's once discarded is now valuable. And so this has been a theme in my life about art and what is the true value of art. And so I've been concerned with that through my work in frame studies and evaluating frames, and it's evolved.
And when you say the word value, I think you're referring very much also to aesthetic value. In other words, a frame that you might have found discarded, that you realize it had great value and it just needed a little TLC perhaps. So when you say value, you don't just mean the monetary value, you mean aesthetic value.
No, primarily my concern is the aesthetic value and what it is.
Right.
The money trail follows after that. But some people consider them to be rotten bits of wood, and I look at it and think, what a precious, beautiful object to survive the vicissitudes of time. And I know what it is. I know where it was made. I know the type of craftsman who made it because of the study of the details. So it becomes a constant search. It's like I'm a beachcomber.
He got a Sony video system, borrowed it from the Smithsonian, and showed up at my farm probably in the early 70s, like maybe 1973 or something like that. And he started shooting video, and so the both of us started shooting video. About the same time, I was taking him up to New York to the annual New York Avant-Garde Art Festival, which usually happened in the fall. The Avant-Garde Festival was a really wonderful mixture of all kinds of wacko artists and traditional artists and video artists. Namjoon Paik was one of the guys in the Avant-Garde Festival. I had a terrific time introducing him to different artists up there.
So it wasn't a casual thing. You really were inspired by your mentors, and you so much appreciated it that you developed a relationship with them. And speaking specifically of the exhibit, as I understand it, you selected artworks from your mentors.
Yes.
Paintings, photographs. Mm-hmm. So you had an opportunity to not only be the subject of the exhibit, but also to have a curatorial impact on the show in terms of selecting work by the mentors that influenced you.
Yeah, it was a difficult process. I worked on curating some shows before, but never my own work. And I called a friend of mine, Paul Richard, and I asked him, I said, look, Paul, how am I going to sort this out? And he said, you need to keep it quite simple.
And what about in terms of the mentors that you selected?
The
same approach to your own work? I imagine it would have been a little different.
The people at Montgomery College, the dean, the exhibits people, they were all trying to help me reduce it to something that was quite simple and direct rather than make it comprehensive. And this is, what Paul Richard told me to do. He said, Bill, you just have to really hone it down to the essence of something and let the work speak for itself. And so the difficult part was not what to include, but what to eliminate.
Right, right.
And so it's gotten down to very direct influences on my work that, sometimes I couldn't see. So I needed some people to help me work on that criteria. And also included one of my students' work, because I thought it was important to show the continuity of how when one learns something, one passes it forward. And having learned at the Smithsonian the craft and the art, and the science of gilding, I was able to early on start teaching gilding classes because I had learned, and I thought this is such an arcane craft, it would be important for other people to learn. So I began teaching. And it forces you to become very succinct and to be very direct with the craft, which is all over the place. But at this point, you can focus your energy on the basics of the craft and let other people develop new techniques, new styles, and that's how I was taught.
My name is Kay Jackson. I'm Bill Adair's wife. We've been married since 1987. I'm an artist in oil painting, and because of Bill, I have learned how to gild. I never would have had the opportunity to learn gilding if it weren't for Bill. And it's become a very important signature in my artwork.
My name is Megan Van Wagner. I am a professor here at Montgomery College and the designer of the exhibit Reflections. In addition to that, I've had the experience of taking a gilding workshop with Bill Adair, and so have had the experience of being a protege with Bill.
I was exposed to gilding in graduate school at George Washington University in a very casual way. When I met Bill, since his world is entirely gilding, he exposed me to the more sophisticated forms of gold leaf. So I first started using it in my oil paintings, in my nocturnes specifically, actually laying the gold leaf in the wet paint.
I was invited down to be part of this very intimate workshop there. It's a small group in a small space. There were about 10 students at the most, 8 or 10. The thing that stuck with me the most from that weekend with Bill was his enthusiasm. I clearly learned a craft. I mean, we learned a technique. but the enthusiasm for the history of it was probably the biggest thing I got out of it. I don't think I've ever looked at a gold frame in the way I look at a gold frame now.
When we went to Rome in 1991, we shared a studio for 6 months. That was where I really learned how to gild, because we had, you know, a constant contact, and he taught me water gilding. And it takes a long time to learn gilding. It's not a casual sort of thing. I came home from that trip and started a series of endangered species that are produced, or they're made like icons. It's evolved over the years into my latest series, which is Thinking Inside the Box, which uses water gilding and gold leaf and gesso and all of the things that I never would have been exposed to unless it was for Bill.
Some of it's the really tedious sanding. You're painting on sizing and glue, and you're being really careful with these extremely delicate pieces of the gold leaf. I mean, it's just like you touch it and the whole thing evaporates in front of you practically. And so there's a lot of detail, care that's learned by watching the way he works. But what he really shared, the thing that I walked away with, was the enthusiasm. And hopefully I've retained a few of the details on how to do it, and I'll be able to repeat that technique. But I am much more excited about the idea of frames and the role that the frame plays.
In order to get this pattern on it, this is a spinner technique, and we simply turn the brush like this, and you can see how it makes the light reflect in different ways.
When you left the National Portrait Gallery, is the first thing you did, you opened a studio of your own? Was the first studio you opened, was it gold leaf, or did that come later?
Well, it was called Gold Leaf Restorations, because
Okay.
that's what I primarily did. And it was across the street from the museum. I had rented a top floor of a building and started there, and a bunch of other artists were there. So I began in earnest to learn how to restore these pieces without destroying their value. And there's a difference between conservation and restoration. Conservation is when you preserve the value, you repair areas of damage to match the existing patina. Whereas restoration, you redo it the way it was originally. That's less desirable for a fine antique, but sometimes dealers want that.
You open your studio and you develop a fine group of clients, and your business takes off.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, I'd call you to see how you're doing, maybe some evening at 9 or 10 at night, and find out you're in Gold Leaf Studios, but you're painting. You're working on your paintings.
Yeah, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about this process, how as an artist, a passionate artist, how you manage to be able to incorporate your creativity as a painter while running the studio. I imagine when you're restoring these frames, when you're curating these frames, you're looking at great paintings that might go in them or were in them, so you're constantly being nurtured by looking at great visual things. So this must have helped your art.
It was like a faucet that couldn't be turned off. Every morning when I woke up, I would think about how I'm going to get the studio organized, but before everyone showed up for work, I would start a painting. And maybe during the day, I'd steal 10, 15 minutes and look at it and work on it a little. But then at the end of the day, I would continue to work on it. So there were the influences of what influenced me, and what was my own was a big concern. I was really trying hard not to be a copyist, but to try to find my own direction.
Your own voice as an artist.
My own voice as an artist. And it was very difficult to do with all the influences. But as a friend of mine once said, it's okay to stand on another artist's shoulders, but don't spit on their head.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well,
I cleaned that up.
I know your art well because it was my great pleasure at Govinda Gallery to present a one-person exhibition of your paintings there. And the theme of that particular group, because I've seen you create many, many themes with your art, were your coffee cup paintings. And I did see that there were some wonderful influences in your work from the gilding, such as using gold leaf as highlights, for instance. And not every artist has that option because they didn't have the familiarity necessarily with gilding and things like that?
I remember the inspiration for them. When my parents died, there were all these coffee cups in their basement. And so it was really at a stoplight coming back from their house in Bethesda to take all this stuff to auction. I realized the coffee cups were the collective unconsciousness for our family. And so I began to do paintings of these to memorialize them. And like the cobbler's children, I couldn't bear to frame my own work. So I simply gilded the edges, and I made all of them circles and ovals. And, well, there's a theme I've been working on for many years. And so everything I started in college, all of these concepts of art, of texture, of printmaking techniques, and, sculpture, painting, gilding, filmmaking, all of it came together and has never left me.
I was very pleased a number of years ago. I was at a conference in Philadelphia, and Bill Adair was giving some seminars. I think it was called the ABC of Framing. And I loved the idea of being a student of my former student, and I signed up for this class. What particularly delighted me was that I had an opportunity to see a few of his own creative pieces, and he was using gold leaf in his paintings. And I loved that idea, that he would take a material that he was using every day to restore frames, but to see him working with that medium and using it in a very different way, and to see that kind of development and growth is very exciting for me, because I think that that is something that hopefully I imparted, the idea that you can try things in different ways and not necessarily use materials in the manner in which traditionally they had been used.
I know that after you established Gold Leaf Studio in 1991, you got, I think it's called the Rome Prize.
That's right.
And were awarded a time in Rome where you could pursue your interests and your craft and everything. I also know that you happen to be married to an extraordinary artist, and a very beautiful woman, Kay. Did she spend that time in Rome with you?
Yes. In fact, that's where I taught her to gild. She said, if you don't teach me now, when are you ever going to have the time? And it's funny, we had our first argument about whether to sift the gesso or to just pour it into the rabbit skin glue. And I have to laugh because she's a master in the kitchen, and she says, well, we always sift flour. And I said, it doesn't matter. And so it was kind of fun. But I was able to, we shared a studio, and it was 6 months in Rome. And so I was able to teach her, and I did some other workshops there. But primarily, I was studying the origins of frame design. And I used all of my skills as an artist to record this information, because when you draw something, you know it. So I went around Italy drawing frames, ones that I loved, ones that I'd studied. And I became almost dangerous in a museum. The guards were wondering why I was lingering so long around one piece. And then I would stay there for 4 or 5 hours drawing it. And, well, this is what we like to do, is we'd travel and look at frames and sketch, and then go back to the studio in Rome, which overlooked the entire city, with many other artists there. It was a fantastic time. One of the major influences on my current work is a guy by the name of Mel Bachner, who was a resident artist there. He had studied with Sol LeWitt. He was very much involved in conceptual art, something that I was not familiar with. I'd been familiar with performance art, but not conceptual art. And I'd been thinking about how a frame affects a painting, and the perception of someone about a frame in a painting is very important. And it was Plato who said that ideas are more real than the physical world. So based on that idea, I took my framing aesthetics and I moved it into a contemporary art project that I just thought it would be part of my history and part of my continuity to continue my art, my frames, my sculpture, but to bring it into the world of more perception rather than the reality. And so I'm still exploring the ideas as I go.
One of the things Bill and I have always done since the beginning of our relationship is go out on Sundays, if it's nice weather, or on our holiday vacation trips. We do watercolors. It's kind of done in parallel, that we'll paint the same view, and we go out for an hour or two. And it's always interesting at the end of those sessions to compare what we came up with. At home, because I paint all day at home, my studio's on the top floor, and of course he's busy with Gold Leaf Studios, he comes often up to the third floor after dinner and looks at what I've done for the day. I rely on him to tell me what's good, what's bad, technically, if there's an easier way to do it. Especially in gilding, there's always some new technique that I accuse him of never having ever mentioned before. And so he kind of reveals certain things to me slowly.
Was your wife, Kay, as an artist, was she also a mentor to you? Did her work influence you?
Oh, there's no question the water always runs in both directions. And she is a consummate professional artist. She is always working every day at her craft, at her art. She has a great deal of skill as a draftsperson. And she is always getting me to draw more. And so that spurring on, the back and forth, it's like having the perfect sparring partner that you can work with on a daily basis. And quite frankly, for years I would live vicariously through her paintings. I'd come home at night after an exhausting day at the studio and see her work and be so inspired by it that it made me feel that art was really the answer.
Beautiful. And I remember seeing Kay's exhibitions. She was also lucky to be married to a fine framer, because the frames in her paintings always look the best of anybody.
She says she married me for my frames. So I say I married her for her art. So it all worked out pretty nice.
And he likes to have my input on his artwork. He has a studio where he works on his things in Gold Leaf Studios. And, I tell him, yes, I love it, I don't, and why. And so we have a really honest, open sort of exchange that way.
Could you tell us a little bit about your most recent project, The Gilded Door to Infinity?
Well, it all began with this exhibit when they asked me to put together a show of my work. And I really didn't feel confident enough with my own work. And that's when I decided to include some of my teachers' work. And then I started to dig in my attic, my storeroom, of pieces that I had done in 1973. And one of the pieces was a wheel, a circle, that was a perpetual motion machine. And I made it right after I had looked through a microscope for the first time in a botany class. And so I thought, there's a whole world of microscopic world, and there's an infinite universe. And so I tried at that time to connect those two concepts together with this perpetual motion machine. As I was looking at that piece, I listened to an Emmylou Harris record in the attic, an old vinyl that I had. And one of the songs was written by Graham Parsons and Chris Hillman. It was called Sin City, and the lyric referenced a gold-plated door. And so I was out in Las Vegas teaching the gilding craft to the framing industry. And I had a 2-day sabbatical where I drove out into the Mojave Desert, and I realized that Graham Parsons died in 1973, not far from where I was. So I drove to the Joshua Tree Inn, and I had this idea to gold leaf the door in the room where he died. It'd be my first gilded door. And it was room number 8.
And this is Graham Parsons.
Graham
For those
Parsons.
who are watching, the great American songwriter and musician.
Yes.
And Chris Hillman, who had been with the Byrds,
Exactly.
the great 60s band, the Byrds. Right.
And Chris Hillman actually was on YouTube, and he was talking about how they wrote the song together. And so it became something of interest to me. So I went to the inn, and I had a bunch of gold leaf, and I was working on this project for Montgomery College, the show. And I thought, why don't I start with the gilded door there? So then I did another one, and people started inscribing the door. And then I realized that it wasn't so much the gilded door that was important, it was the inscriptions, the homage to an artist, to Graham Parsons. And it became a very simple thing for me. As projects go, they're quite complicated, but in the distillation, it simply is an acknowledgement of a man's art form who died in 1973. So I'm bringing it to 2011, and I'm connecting those 40 years so that we understand that there is a continuity to life. And so it became the gilded door to infinity. So this would be one of the doors of the project, and here's a couple more that are have the varnish on them that become sticky, and then the leaf is actually applied like this. This is not real gold, this is a brass leaf. There you have it. And then you make the circles on it. You can see the reflectivity, how the light changes. You spin it like this.
In putting together this exhibition, it's not always obvious where the link is between the mentor and the protege. It's much harder to see specific things, visual, concrete evidence within the work that's made. And I do think it's interesting, though, as we started to go through the work, to select specific mentors of Bill's and the specific works, and then to find work that Bill's done that sort of demonstrates some sort of link. And as you look longer, you start to see little things that come out. And it was very interesting to watch the different pieces sort of start to pair up, to definitely find little elements, tiny little things that are in a painting of Bill's, and say, wow, you know, there's something about that color, or the way that mark is made, or the overall form that is reminiscent of something that we see in one of the mentor's pieces. Like, one of the most interesting ones, I think, was a marble torso. It's a very abstract, very soft, sculpted marble form. And we wanted to include it, but it was hard to find initially that specific piece that it tied into, the specific mentor that influenced that. And it wasn't until looking at a photograph by one of his mentors and said, you know, that photograph is extremely sculptural. It's a black and white photograph. It has very much the same tonal range that's in the marble. And the form, the photograph is of a torso. All of a sudden you just start to see, like, oh, you see the little pieces that he may have seen in a photograph of hers and carried it through into a sculptural piece that was probably created years later. And there were lots of those little elements that were visible in the artwork.
Bill, you've referred to mirrors as, quote, the purest art form. Why did you come up with this idea of mirrors being the purest art form?
It's true. It's actually not an original idea of mine. My teacher, Paul Levy, who's a great frame maker and historian, he told me that a frame to a painting should never be noticed. A proper frame is one that blends in, that's almost camouflaged, so that you see the painting first. A frame for a painting that says, I'm the frame, is a failure. If you see the painting and you look at it and you go, what a wonderful frame, it's sort of like saying, well, too bad about the art. You know, so there's a connection between the frame and the painting that we say sit in silent symbiosis with each other. Whereas a mirror is the only time that the frame does not have to be subservient to the painting. It can sing on its own, and therefore it becomes, to me, one of the purest art forms in the carver and gilder's art, because he simply has to respond to the technical prowess, the technical abilities, the wood, the gold, the toning, the beveled mirror, the reflections of it, of the gold, rubbing the gold, having darks and lights. And a good frame is one that echoes the 5 distinct values of the painting from light to dark. The frame, if it has those different degrees of reflectivity, echo the values and contrast within the painting as well. So it's an interesting dynamic of color, texture, form, sculptural painting. A frame really is the epitome of everything that is involved in art. It becomes an essay unto itself. It becomes the work of art. In fact, sometimes I call the frames the other artwork.
I was really thinking about the artwork in a frame, and although the frame adds to the way you perceive it, that's something we learn in art school, definitely, you don't think about it, like a gold frame's a gold frame, is sort of the way I looked at them before. And now I'm looking really closely at the details of how they're carved, the patterning that's on them. There are sort of, as you start to look at them more, you realize there are different classifications of frames, and I start to sort of identify things, and that was a lot from Bill talking about, oh, there's this, and he gets really excited about all of that.
Bill, I wanted to ask you about the mentor-protege relationship, which is the title of your exhibit. Could you speak to that idea a little bit more?
Well, the ideal mentor is someone who teaches you to think rather than you imitating their work. And that is a very difficult thing to do. For example, one of my teachers would never tell me the answer to anything when I asked him. Never. He would pose his answer with another question. And so I thought that he didn't know the answer. At first, I thought that he didn't want to tell me the answer, but then I realized that it was his way of getting me to think for myself rather than be a parrot imitating what he said. And so that was an important distinction. In terms of having a protege, the ideal protege, well, I guess I can quote Cennini, who wrote the Craftsman's Handbook in 1347. He said, I offer you urgent advice to attach yourself to a master, and do not leave him until you are ready. They'd no number of years, nothing. And so if you think about that, you attach yourself to a master and do not leave him until you're ready. It's an individual determination. We teach people, and we know within the first day whether or not they have the hardware to deal with the meticulousness of the job. It's a mindset. And so you have to pick your proteges carefully, and they cannot think of it as a job. They think of it as a career. That's an important distinction. You don't think about the cost and the value of things. You think about what is the worth of something. Those are concepts where I'm constantly training people, being asked to train people, and we look for those characteristics in the perfect protege.
Which is very nice, because you're still being informed by your mentors, whether they're here or not, and what you then transfer on.
It's the continuity of the art form and passing it forward.
I think the ideal relationship between a mentor and protege is mutual respect. I think that it's important that the protege not view his or her mentor as some kind of demigod, as someone who has all the answers. I think it's important that the protege understand that the mentor is on the same journey that he or she is on.
To me, brutally speaking, the best mentor-protege relationship is to treat the guy like a village idiot, because he comes to you thinking he already has a grasp on the world, but he doesn't. He only thought that.
The mentor-protege relationship, I think every one of them is unique. And Bill and I mean, in my opinion, I think we have the best.
I think the ideal mentor-protege relationship is one in which the mentor shares as much as they possibly can without forcing anything on their protege.
There may be an age difference, there's undoubtedly an experience difference, but the experiences between these two people are going to be different. And I really believe that the mentor can learn as much from the protege as vice versa. And I think that all comes down to mutual respect.
If the guy has enough sense that something good is going to come of this thing, then he'll stick around and he'll endure the jibes and he'll endure the humor, and finally he'll get to the point where he's being treated with the respect that he thought he deserved from the moment he showed up.
We don't get in each other's way, and it's something that I know is a continuum. So that's kind of a nice thing to know that it goes on and on.
It's really important that the protege, or the student, just figures out how to express themselves. It's not about you telling them how to do something. It's explaining how you've done it and allowing them to take that and interpret it and use the pieces and parts of that that make sense to them and be themselves.
I'm delighted to say that I really consider a number of people who I would consider my proteges to now be my peers. And that's kind of the ultimate reward. I think that's a reward that as teachers we all would like to have.
The thing that I really liked about Billy was that he actually kind of tried to return some of the kindness that I showed to him by kindness that he showed to me.
As far as being a couple and being artists too, it seems to be a wonderful sort of way to go through life. You feel like you have a sympathetic audience at the end of the day.
I don't think that the ideal is to make a copy of yourself, and it's actually not that interesting. So the ideal is really just to share everything you can, your own experience, your skills, your enthusiasm, and let the student use that as in whatever way they can. They're not all going to turn out the way you want them to, but you've given them all that you have. You've shared everything you can, and you let them take that and do with it what they will.
I think Bill Adair is a wonderful example of a protege surpassing his mentor. I am humbled when I look at Bill's accomplishments. He is not only an amazing human being, a wonderful human being, but an incredibly talented artist and a master craftsman. And I'm just delighted that I had some small part of his development.
I'm feeling that whatever it was I gave him 40 years ago in school, I'm getting back more than I gave even.
I've learned a lot more from Bill than he's learned from me. So it's been an interesting sort of 25 years here, and I'm looking forward to another 25.
So I think there's a nice harmony in your life and in your work, even though you have so many skills and interests. they do seem to combine nicely, and I think that's a wonderful reflection on what you do, and I think it brings us back to the idea of reflections, mentor and protege, how that's also a combination of influences. So just like the world is very complex and has so many aspects to it, your work, your projects, and your path leading to that also had so many aspects to it that as a wonderful artist you've brought together nicely, and I think that would be a great place to conclude this conversation.
Well, thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Reflections, Mentor and Protégé, featuring the work of William B. Adair and his mentors, is an exhibition at the Cultural Arts Center Gallery on Montgomery College's Tacoma Park, Silver Spring campus from October 7th through December 16th. For more information about this exhibition, please call 240-567-5780 or go to montgomerycollege.edu/CAC. Montgomery College hopes to see you in our reflections.